Assalamualaikum and hello everyone. My name is Huzaifah bin Hamzah 2200207 from 2FSTPA. Now I will present about the evolution of political community and political system. Politics derive from the Greek word polis, that means the city-state is the activities of the city-state. The city-states involve a large-scale civilized social group, so politics is the activities of a large-scale civilized social group. The pre-civilized social group was a small-scale pre-civilized hunter-gatherer social group. So, according to the original meanings of politics, a small-scale pre-civilized hunter-gatherer social group, which was not a city-state, did not have politics. The main purpose are to reshape or influence on a governmental structure and to influence the implementation and formation of public policies. This video proposed is to compare the evolution of political community and political system between two types of government, which is monarchy and caliphate. Before explaining those two governments, we will go through the political changes first. Political life is shaped by a wide variety of factors, including social and cultural conditions, economic organization, intellectual and philosophical influences, geography or climate, and historical circumstance. Recurrent attempts have been made to reduce this range of variables to analytically manageable dimensions. This is partly the motive, for example, of Marxists and other efforts to relate specific types of political system to stage of economic development or particular kinds of socio-economic organization. Although interesting interrelations between political and economic development have been discovered, such monistic or single factor approaches are inadequate to the task of explaining political change. The problem is not only that there are many factors that should be examined, but also that they are found in different combinations from one society to another. All political orders are unique as products of history and creations of the peculiar forces and conditions of their environment. The second problem that confronts comparative analysis is the difficulty of devising measures of political development. Clearly, the older notions of development toward the goals of constitutionalism or democracy must now be seriously questioned, and to judge the maturity of political system in terms of the extent to which it adopts any particular set of institutions or techniques of rule is an equally doubtful procedure. Another difficulty is that political change is not simply a reaction to objective factors, such as economic forces, but also the product of conscious manipulation. In explaining the growth and development of political system, it is impossible to ignore the fact that people, having considered the advantages and disadvantages of different forms of government, often decide to adopt from one rather than another. A similar problem arises from the fact that the nature of the interaction between political system and their environment is extremely complex. For example, to treat the political system as merely the outgrowth of particular patterns of social or economic organization is to ignore the fact that changes in social and economic structures are often the product, sometimes the intended product, of governmental action. Evolution of monarchy. The ancient distinction among monarchies, tyrannies, oligarchies, and constitutional governments, like other traditional classifications of political system, is no longer very descriptive of political life. Monarchs may be ceremonial heads of states, as in a parliamentary democracy, or they may be heads of government, perhaps even functioning as absolute rulers. In the first case, their duties may be little different from those of elected presidents in many republican parliamentary regimes. In the second, their roles may be much the same as dictators in autocratic regimes. It may be said of the reigning dynasties of modern Europe that they have survived only because they have failed to retain or to acquire effective powers of government. Royal lines have been preserved only in those countries of Europe in which royal rule was severely limited prior to the 20th century, or in which royal absolutism had never firmly established itself. More successful dynasties, such as the Hohenzollerns in Germany or the Habsburgs in Austria-Hungary and the Romanov in Russia, which continued to rule as well as to reign at the opening of the 20th century, paid with the loss of their thrones. Today, in countries such as Great Britain, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Denmark, the monarch is the ceremonial head of states, an indispensable figure in all great official occasions. and a symbol of national unity and of the authority of the states, but is almost entirely lacking of power. Monarchy in the parliamentary democracies of modern Europe has been reduced to the status of a dignified institutional facade behind which the functioning mechanism of government, such as cabinet, parliament, ministries, and parties, go about the task of ruling. The 20th century also saw the demise of most of the hereditary monarchies of the non-Western world. Thrones toppled in Turkey, in China, in most of the Arab countries, in the Principates of India, in the tribal kingdoms of Africa, and in several countries of Southeast Asia. The monarchs will maintain their position to do so less by the claim of legitimate blood descent than by their appeal as popular leaders, responsible for well-publicized programs of national economic and social reform, or as national military chieftains. In a sense, these rulers are less monarchs than monocrats, and their regimes are little different from several other forms of one-person rule found in the modern world. Monarchy system. It refers to an administrative system which places the highest power to a certain individual without taking into consideration the individual ability and impose no limits to its duration. The monarchy is also associated with the king or kingdom where the king serves as chief executive. For example, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Brunei Darussalam. The system can be divided into three forms. First, absolute monarchy, which headed by a king, queen, or kaiser that are invested with executive, legislative, and judiciary power. Second, constitutional monarchy. The system provides avenues for people to participate in the country administration. However, their actions and activities are limited by constitution. And lastly, parliamentary monarchy, which parliament is the highest source of power. Evolution of Caliphate. Caliphate, or in Arabic we call Khilafat, was a semi-religious political system of governance in Islam, in which the territories of the Islamic Empire in the Middle East and North Africa and the people within were ruled by a supreme leader called Caliph, or Khalifa in Arabic, which means successor. Caliphs were initially the sole sovereigns of the empire left behind by Prophet Muhammad SAW and added vast territories of surrounding rival empires to it. They were initially selected by a group of senior members of a primitive parliament who kept in mind the will of the people. The first four caliphs who were nominated in such a way are referred to as Rashidun, rightly guided, caliph by mainstream Sunni Muslim, Shia Muslim. Consider only Ali, the fourth one, to be legitimate and discard the claims of the first three by branding them as usurpers. The Institute of Caliphates showed three major phases of evolution. At first, it started as a religiously inspired political system whose holder must ensure that the law of God must prevail over his land. Although the lack of centralization meant that most of the local customs and administrative frameworks persisted in newly conquered territories. This early phase had one serious flaw. The religious inspiration was not enough to secure the caliph position. After the murder of Uthman, it had become apparent that the political component of the institute was the dominant one and that caliphate could simply be snatched. This was further affirmed when the Umayyad and Abbasid dynasties rose to power. Both were met with stiff resistance and resentment but continued to rule in spite of that, something that the early caliph could not have done, considering the leniency of Uthman and his unwillingness to use military power to suppress revolts. These two empires also introduced and mixed the concept of dynastic rule with caliphates. For example, caliphate could now be inherited. When the Ottomans officially assumed that the undisputed claim to caliphates in 1570 century, they became the first non-Arabs by ethnicity to gain the command of the faithful. This change also brought a new sense of equality amongst the Muslim world. Arab and non-Arab Muslims were equal in all aspects, even politics. The abolition of the institute and no efforts to revive it are considered unfortunate by the Muslims who believe that although the political and military might of the institute was long lost. Its symbolic importance to the Islamic community as a semi-religious political system and the inspiration it provided was a priceless cultural legacy. Caliphate system. There are conditions to be appointed as a caliph. First, Muslim. Second, Aman. Puberty, sanity, justice, freedom, and have capability to lead the country. Daulah Islamiyah. And there are some legal requirements as caliph. Firstly, eligible in Iqad a caliphate. There is a clear region and its people. Peace and power in the region was in the hands of the Muslim, not run by foreigners. And lastly, implement Islam as a whole. In Islam, there are 4 basic systems which emphasize that the title of caliph. First, sovereignty is based on the Islamic principle. Second, power is in the hands of the Muslim. Third, Muslim must appoint a leader anywhere in the Muslim world. Fourth, only the leader caliph who may modify and determine the Sharia law after exercise the ijtihad, consensus and shura. Responsibilities of a caliph towards Muslim. First, preserving lineage. Second, preserving reasoning. Third, preserving the honor. Fourth, preserving life, man. 5, preserving property. 6, preserving religion. 7, keeping the peace. And lastly, preserving the country. In a nutshell, there is no catalogue of constitution staff to define caliphates and its terms, if any. A caliph is elected somehow and he mounts the minbar or altar of the main mosque, addressing Muslim of how he views his mission and what he is up to. This is what had been happening by then. People base caliphate definition on what had been occurring from one caliph to another. A caliph is not supposed to hand caliphates over to one of his close relatives, most probably his son or brother in rare cases. A caliph is supposed to be elected by a form of consensus or voting by elite seniors. This is what happened in the 4 earliest caliphates. What followed contradicted this idea, which is based mainly on a hadith that instructs a Muslim to elect a man to rule over them, even if there were a few ones. Only Imam Ali handed it over to his eldest son, Imam Al-Hasan, yet he was not ruling over all Islamic countries and people. Muawiyah seized an ample chunk, and we can speak of the caliph ruling different parts of Islamic empire simultaneously. The Umayyad Caliphate and the Abbasid too went into a dynasty governance rather than a caliphate. There were sultans and not caliph, if we want to be precise. A sultan is a monarch, a king who presumes that the authority is meant for him, and his successor of the same clan or tribe. It gets more complex when we ask both kinds of rulers. What rights do you have? How much do you receive of money and other privileged stuff? I see caliphate system as an extinct system that was only there for a few decades after the demise of Prophet Muhammad SAW. Monarchy was there and it still is. A monarch presumes that the land is all his. The flora and fauna as well as people living there are all owned by him. That's all from me. Thank you for watching until the end and thank you for listening too. I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.